Arnold Schoenberg lived from 1874 through 1951. And Arnold Schoenberg is one of those composers whose name you should take careful note of, because in fact, simply by looking at his name, you can learn certain things about his life and about his works, or at least you can remember certain details about his life and his works simply by looking at elements of his name. For example, Schoenberg was born in the former Austrian Empire, and in this unit, all of the composers whose first names begin with A were born in the former Austrian Empire. By the way, our composer's initials and his first name, that is A.S. and Arnold, are the same as those of the governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was also a famous immigrant from that very same part of the world. Since we have three Austrian composers in this unit, we're going to distinguish among them by social caste. And in terms of social caste, there was nothing terribly striking about Schoenberg. He was a commoner. Schoenberg is one of those people, like Stravinsky and Wagner, who eventually found his way to music. He did not set out to become a musician from early childhood or even from adolescence, but it was not until he was an adult that he turned most of his attentions to music. In fact, he started out dabbling in many arts. He was an accomplished painter. He wrote a number of poems and other bits of prose and poetry, and when he became a composer, he actually put this talent of his, writing poetry and prose, to use. So he was decidedly a multi-talented artist who found his way to music rather late in life. Right about the same time Stravinsky did, right about the time that he was 20 years old. Although Schoenberg in fact did take 6 months of counterpoint lessons with Alexander von Semlinsky, he was otherwise largely self-taught in music. And it's important to note this, because like Stravinsky, he has very little in common with his teacher in terms of the style of music in which he composed. And being largely self-taught has certain consequences for a composer's output. Indeed, if Schoenberg were fully schooled in music in a traditional sense, it is quite unlikely that he would have taken the time to invent serialism during the 1920s. Since Schoenberg was not terribly bound by the rules because he did not learn all of them, he felt free to exercise his creativity, and here is an extreme example of that sort of creativity, inventing a brand new method of musical composition. So when you think of Schoenberg, think of serialism. Oh, by the way, take a look at serialism. Notice that it begins with an S, and then the second two letters of it are E and R. Just like Schoenberg's name, he's the only composer in this unit whose last name begins with an S and that later has an ER in it. Schoenberg serialism. Another great way to use a composer's name to remember something about him. Schoenberg had a number of important and famous students. In fact, the next two composers we're going to examine in this unit are students of his. And by the way, you can actually identify these composers as students of Schoenberg by taking a look at certain coincidences that occur in all three of their surnames. Okay, you're probably rolling your eyes right now, but really this is a great way to remember composers' names. And I don't think that any of you will complain a bit if you do well on the test that's going to be given on this unit. He, like Stravinsky, moved to the United States of America in the late 1930s. But unlike Stravinsky, who simply chose to move to the United States, Schoenberg basically had to move to the United States. He was Jewish. He held a teaching position in Germany. Jews were unwelcome in Germany, and basically he had to leave in order to find a way to make a living to support himself and his family. So he moved to the United States. And where did he move in the United States? All the way to the West Coast, to the Los Angeles area, probably to be as far away from Europe as he could possibly be. Although Schoenberg did not have a full formal education in music, he did have credentials sufficient to get him a teaching job, and when he settled in the Los Angeles area, he took up teaching at the University of California at Los Angeles, and he spent the rest of his life teaching at this institution. By the way, you can associate him with UCLA because Schoenberg is the only composer in this unit whose last name or his surname has a C in it. Schoenberg, UCLA. Now, Schoenberg, like Stravinsky, had a long life and a long career. Both of these composers were largely self-taught in music, so they weren't terribly tied to traditional methods and techniques of musical composition, and each of them brought their creativity to bear on their output on a regular basis. Basically, they changed their style from one decade to another. And Schoenberg has many stylistic periods in his career. And he was definitely one of the two most influential composers of the 20th century. Part of this is due to the fact that he invented serialism, and that serialism was taken up by composers, especially by academic composers, around the middle of the 20th century, and it's remained the dominant style of musical composition in the world of art music from that time until the present. So Schoenberg, like Stravinsky, holds a very important place in the history of 20th century music. Now notice that Schoenberg and Stravinsky do have certain things in common. Since they do have certain things in common, these are the things that you should not think about greatly. What you need to think about are the things that distinguish these two musical giants from one another, their places of origin, etc. And, as I've already pointed out to you, Schoenberg's very name, both his first name and his surname, can be very helpful in establishing the group of facts that you need to distinguish him from Stravinsky.